Choosing an eDiscovery vendor? Easy. Just look at the price list and compare who's got the lowest prices, right? Well, maybe. Coming up next. Selecting an eDiscovery vendor is an important but often daunting task, which is why it's really easy just to fall back to saying, hey, each vendor, give me your price list and I will pick the cheapest. That's really easy, but it's also really dicey because there are a lot of important things that you need to consider that are not reflected in a price list. For instance, how is that gigabyte in the price list calculated? So let's take a production, for instance. You've got vendor 1 that charges $90 per gigabyte for production, or vendor 2 that charges $150 per gigabyte for production. On its face, that's a super simple calculation, right? Well, 90 is cheaper than 150, so vendor 1 is the better way to go. Except that vendor 2 calculates your production set based upon only the native dock size, whereas vendor 1 calculates those gigabytes based upon the total production set size, which can be 2 to 3 times larger than the native size. Therefore, vendor 1 is going to be charging you about $1,800 to $2,700, whereas vendor 2 is going to only charge you $1,500. So overall job cost is cheaper with the more expensive vendor than it is with the less expensive per gigabyte provider. A similar situation can happen with project management fees. You have vendor 1 that charges $175 per hour and vendor 2 at $250 per hour. Now, on the surface, that's an easy decision to make. 175 is less than 250, so that's the direction you go. But pause for a second. You need to ask some questions. First up would be, vendor 1, do you lock down review platform functionality in order to force me into project management hours? Also, do your project managers have a monthly billing quota so they're looking for every little excuse to bill me project management hours? What you're really looking for is, does one vendor promote project management dependence? And conversely, does one vendor promote project management independence? In the end, you can see that with vendor 1, they're going to bill you for like 15 hours at $175 an hour, and vendor 2 is only going to bill you for maybe 5 hours at $250 per hour. So again, the less expensive vendor turns out to be more expensive. Next, how experienced are those project managers at each firm? Experienced and tenured PMs are going to come up with better workflows for time and money savings. Not all PMs are created the same. Be sure to ask each vendor for the bios of all of their project management so you can see their experience and certifications. You might just be surprised about what you find. Okay, another topic that's very important when selecting a vendor is security. Now, I've heard all sorts of legal practitioners say, oh, I'll just select one of the big eDiscovery providers. They've all got great security. And I think, again, that's an attempt to avoid the drudgery of having to sort it out, because who wants to go through security documentation and ask all those questions? It's not any fun. But it's very clear to me at this point that not all eDiscovery providers are the same when it comes to security, even the big ones. So you're going to want to ask some questions. Now, I certainly can't cover all the questions you might want to ask in this video because it's a large topic. But to get started, you might want to ask about multi-factor authentication and whether data is encrypted in transit and at rest. Those are a couple things to keep in mind. But do vet your providers, because this is an area that can really come back to bite you if you don't do it properly. Finally, can that vendor scale easily? You might start out with a case that you think is very moderate in size, but find all of a sudden that it's growing, and it's growing rapidly. In fact, it's growing so quickly that the tool you're using is no longer up to the task. Are you in a position now where your vendor can seamlessly move you to a new tool that can handle a case of that size, or are you going to be stuck scrambling looking for a new vendor who has an appropriate tool? That obviously is nobody's idea of fun. Now, of course, there's so much more we could talk about when it comes to selecting an eDiscovery provider, but let me know in the comments how you go about selecting a provider. Just don't rely on that price list alone. It can cost you if you do.